you don't have an audience if you're only talking to yourself. It wasn't a matter of just practicing gratitude or anything like that. It just flooded over me, in part because I think I was ready for it. Doing your very best for that noble part of yourself. You owe it to yourself. I don't believe in manifestation actually causing things to happen. What manifestation can do, if you're visualizing your own future, it's a way of persuading yourself that you're capable of this, that you can make things happen. What would be the most soul-satisfying thing I can?
What if the secret to achieving your wildest dreams wasn't about willpower, but about mastering an ancient, almost magical art? An art so potent it can literally bend your soul. Imagine transforming crippling pain into triumph, or outrunning time itself. Our guest today, Jay Heinrichs, New York Times bestselling author, isn't just an expert in persuading others. He's pioneered the radical concept of self-persuasion, revealing how the wisdom of Aristotle, this is what we're going to get into philosophy today, can help you rewrite your own destiny. From helping NASA to coax missiles from the Pentagon to his own unbelievable feat of running his age up a New Hampshire mountain. He's here to show you how ancient rhetoric, a dash of Taylor Swift, and even your own inner soul can help you change your life. Get ready to unlock the power to be the boss of you. This is going to be soul-bending. Thank you, Jay, for being on the episode today.
Oh man, that was the best introduction, Jason. You win.
Oh, cool. Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Jay. I appreciate it. What I want to show everybody, because I encourage everybody to just go right now. Everybody trust me. Go to the Amazon link below and get the book. It's right here. I read it. It's amazing. What persuaded you to write the book? I know you mentioned you got a nudge from your wife, Dorothy, and there was like a health challenge. But what persuaded you to get, I know you're a New York Times bestseller, but to go specifically into this?
It was more than a nudge from my wife. I think she was desperate. She was married to a guy who was getting old and sounding like it. Hey, get off my lawn kind of attitude. And at the same time, I was suffering from this combination really common to guys in their 50s. Self-pity being the biggest one.
Right. Yes.
But also depression. And I had this really horrible hip ailment or things, but this was snapping hip syndrome. Literally drove me to the floor. I would not be able to walk and I'd collapse to the floor in terrible pain. I couldn't sleep at night. Doctors were telling me that maybe surgery, maybe I'd be able to walk normally again, maybe I'd end up in a wheelchair. So I was feeling desperate myself, and I think my wife was feeling even more desperate being married to a guy like me. So she said, why don't you, persuasion boy, why don't you apply some of these tools that you've used for clients and writing books and all that? This ancient art of rhetoric, which has been responsible for allowing people to disagree without violence, is really the sauce, the secret sauce behind democracies. It's how democracies got invented. It inspired Shakespeare. I could go on. She said, why don't you apply these same tools to yourself that manipulate whole nations and the entire world? And I said, that's impossible because you don't have an audience if you're only talking to yourself. Because I love my wife, I did my best and took a deep dive back into Aristotle, reading things I hadn't read, and I came across a secret that Aristotle had shared that actually allows you to create your own audience within yourself.
Do you feel like, because I know in the book you elaborate on Aristotle's concept of the soul as the unus of a person. And I try to figure out like what is the higher self, that deepest identity, like the ultimate motive. And you describe your own soul as pretty awesome, while your daily self is grouchy, timid, and too lazy to shave. And I think this distinction's super crucial. How does thinking of your soul as a separate superior entity, like I would call the higher self or the audience, how did it change the dynamic of self-persuasion for you?
So this was what I stumbled on when I was reading Aristotle. I think it's his weirdest book. And I have a feeling he had more fun writing this book than any others. Aristotle's not fun to read, get me wrong. But on the other hand, this is really weird. And I'll tell you what, I'm not woo-woo at all. I'm a journalist by background.
Right.
Believe in anything. And yet, what he described as the soul This is Mr. Logic himself, the guy who invented logic as we know it. And when he described the soul, he was describing it as if it was an organ in the body. In fact, he tried to find which organ it was. And it was years later when another philosopher said he found it. It was in the pituitary gland. That being said, what the soul essentially is the noblest part of you. It's the man in the mirror, the person who is expressing you at your very best. Now, my soul is awesome, but so is yours. Yours is probably more awesome. My soul has some annoying traits to it, but basically the way he describes it sounds like the Boy Scout oath: the loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. My soul is all that stuff, and it just looks at what I do on a daily basis, and I can hear it sigh every now and then. And this is true of all of us. What we do daily is not ever living up entirely to that ideal sense of ourselves, and that's what Aristotle was talking about. And that soul provides the audience that it's your job to convince you live up to. And that employs not just getting better habits, but also getting into those habits by the attempt of persuading your soul that you're worthy of it.
Yeah, and I love in the book when you got into the self-persuasion paradox, and you reference there was like a psychologist, Elliot, I don't remember his last name, Armstrong or something. Yeah, and his research on cognitive dissonance. Can you go into that a little bit so people can understand this, that are like yourself, not woo, understand how cognitive dissonance and how you use that?
Yeah, so cognitive dissonance is essentially describing the separation from the soul that Aristotle describes. And by the way, Aristotle's soul is really not like the soul we learn about in church or temple, the mosque. It dies when we do. So
Right.
I don't think it contradicts with it, but essentially, cognitive dissonance is a modern interpretation of this idea that your daily self is not living up to your truest sense of yourself, of who you really ought to be or really are at root. And the way that this neurologist, this psychologist came up with was this experiment to discover how cognitive dissonance actually works. And he and his grad students invited some people to attend this workshop. And they made the workshop deliberately boring. But before that, they had people attend a sort of training session to prepare for the workshop. The first group had an easy time of it, simple, like a fun, easy introduction, then you head into the workshop. The second group, they made it really painful and difficult before they went into the workshop. But the workshop was the same. The language being used by the trainers was identical. And so they compared how the two groups felt about that workshop. And the first group, the easy group, let's call them, said it was really boring. That workshop was terrible. The second group, which had gone through the difficult introduction, said it was really interesting. They got a lot out of it. Now, the way Aberson put it, maybe it is Aronson. I'm sorry.
No, I think you're right. I think you're right. Don't go off me. I have a hard time with pronouncing words.
I do. I have senior moments with people's names. In any case, the interpretation of this was that the second group, the difficult group, was experiencing cognitive dissonance, which is where their sense of themselves, which is as thoughtful people who wouldn't waste their time on something stupid, had put themselves through something difficult just to waste their time. And they weren't going to accept that because they were the kind of people who wouldn't do something that stupid. So that is the key to self-persuasion in the sense that cognitive dissonance is when you're doing anything that separates yourself from that higher sense of yourself. And whenever you're feeling outside of yourself or you feel you're not living your best life, that's a form of cognitive dissonance, but very specific on things like how you feel after you eat a donut. That may not be guilt you're feeling. It may be something a lot more interesting. And that may give you a hint of not just what your soul is, but how to communicate with it.
No, then we're going to get into that. And I love the donut story. That's great. I want to get into, because I know in chapter 2, you talked about time and this kairos. And I know there's chrono or chronograph, like we have our watches and different things like that. But then there's this other part of time, this kairos. And it's the art of grabbing a moment at its ripest or seeing chaos as an opening or mysterious gap. And I know on New Year's Eve, you had a chaotic moment, you broke your leg. How can people apply this and spot these and reframe when something like that happens in their life?
So first of all, we're getting in the weeds here with Greek, Jason. I hope your audience appreciates this.
Yes.
That's clearly a very intelligent audience. So the kairos is this really interesting concept of time that the Greeks came up with, because you have Chronos, who's the god who's in charge of time as it marches on. It's how we think of as time. It's continuous, it's linear, it's what our clock tells us, that sort of thing. Kairos, on the other hand, is time that slows down and speeds up and creates these gaps. And those gaps are chaotic times when nothing makes sense. There's a disruption in your life or a disruption in your culture where things change and the rules don't apply. So the way the Greeks talked about that, they described it as during a chariot race, when there's an opening in a chariot race, so you can sneak into that opening and get ahead of your rival. They also described it, though, as an arrow that is so precise it pierces the opening in an enemy's armor. So they saw Kairos as an art of openings. Now, they also saw it as the art of opportunity. And I'm going to get even more word nerdy here, because opportunity comes from the Latin opportunitas, which comes from the word portas in Latin, which means opening or door, port. Okay, so we're back at Kairos, which is the art of exploiting these gaps in time or gaps in our lives where openings come together. Now, they seem like swirling confusion, but they're really maybe not. They're when the rules no longer apply, and that gives you the opportunity to do things. Now, the great disruptors in Silicon Valley, the Bill Gates of the world, the Steve Jobs, they were seen as disruptors, but if you look at your history at the time, and I lived through it, it was a time when things already were disrupted. Don't trust anybody over 30, right? There was a Vietnam War, which seemed to a whole generation to be useless. A lot of rules were breaking. You had a president of the United States who ordered a break-in in his rival's headquarters, Watergate. All this stuff was disruption. These guys decided they were just going to ignore rules because the rules weren't applying anymore. So they took this chaotic time and they created the microcomputer, which led to Microsoft Word and Apple Computer. All of that is something that we can take advantage of in our own lives. We go through changes all the time that seem like pure chaos. Now, word nerdy again. Chaos itself originally came from the Greek chaos, which meant gap. It was later interpreted by the Christians and Jews as this space, this empty space between heaven and earth, where all kinds of spiritual things can happen. But more than that, it also affects time as well. Now, to the point where kairos, which is this art of exploiting these gaps and understanding when they open up and where those gaps are and how you're going to take advantage of them, they actually created a god out of that named Kairos, of all things, who had beautiful, long, curly hair like a good Greek in front, and in back he was entirely bald. And why? Because you have to grab Fortune or Kairos by the hair before he passes by, because he grows bald really quickly. And at the end, you can't catch the guy. You have to be really precise, not just with that sense of timing, but where that timing is, those gaps between things. Now, that is a kind of philosophy to think about when you're thinking about changes in your own life. Some people keep their heads together when everything falls apart, and other people just panic and freeze. It's those people who keep their heads together and see the gaps, see the opportunities, who end up taking advantage of them. And that can be on a quotidian level, on the tiniest thing, where you're able to rethink your work when you have a 2-year-old. Your job disappears and you rethink your life. That not as all miserable chaos, but chaos in the sense of this gap gap between heaven and earth that you're going to walk through.
Yeah, and I think it was so beautifully done when you talked about that New Year's Eve, the story where your family came together and you realized this immense love. Can you kinda, if you don't mind, go through that a little bit and then how you learned in that moment what scary, chaotic can turn into be with this possibility?
Yeah, thanks for that. We go from Greek gods to me. Thank you for that.
Do you have beautiful curly hair? Yeah.
Yeah, ball behind the whole
Yes.
package. It happened to be New Year's Eve. And by the way, I had some champagne, but not that much. And the sparklers ran out. We go to bed early,
Right.
where we live in the middle of nowhere. Our grown son was with us, and we were playing with the sparklers at, I don't know, 8 o'clock at night. And when a sparkler ran out, I went to go inside to get ready for bed long before most people celebrate New Year's Eve do that, not knowing that one foot was on a patch of ice and the other foot was on the ground. And so as I went to turn around, I suddenly spun a whole lot, and while one leg stayed in place. And I'd get caused a spiral fracture up
Mhm.
my leg. And of course, I'm lying there on the ground, and I look at my foot, it's pointing in the wrong direction. And I
Mhm.
said, my leg is broken. Now, that is, as you defined it perfectly, a kairotic moment. My life suddenly changed, right? I was pretty active, but not that terribly active, but I like to walk. I like to be outside. I like to ski. And I had a lot of work to do. All that was gone. And you would think, as I'm lying there, oh boy, at my age, this shouldn't happen because I already was suffering. And look what's happening to me now. From that point on, my life got better, and remarkably so. My wife immediately ran inside, fed the cats, turned off the lights, and called our daughter, who's a rapid response nurse in Washington, D.C. Our daughter immediately got other people to take her shift, started driving up to New Hampshire from Washington. Meanwhile, our son, very strong guy, picked me up bodily and threw me in the car. There was no ambulance service at the time in the middle of nowhere, so they had to drive me through freezing rain. From that point on, everyone was so calm and took care of me so well. Now, this leads to an interpretation of a particular time. And this is really important rhetorically, how you frame things, how you define what an issue is. So I broke my leg. I was in terrible pain. I now have a 14-inch rod in my leg. So poor me. But I was happier than I had been in a very long time. In fact, because the pain was nothing compared to the amount of love I was feeling, even from total
Mhm.
strangers. Even the nurses were amazing. I am so lucky to have good medical care. Everything just worked out so well. And it made me realize that all the stuff that I'd been feeling sorry for myself for really compared to now, you can interpret this as gratitude, and of course it is, but I think it's more important than that, which is that disruption itself was an opportunity for me to rethink things, to
Mhm.
rethink my life. So it wasn't a matter of just practicing gratitude or anything like that. It just flooded over me, in part because I think I was ready for it.
Yeah, that's so interesting how it had to be in that moment for the gratitude. And like you said, it just flooded over you, like it hit you. But it was the actions of the family, but all those years and years of obviously you being a great father, that and then husband, that all came together in that moment. But if you wouldn't have had that supposedly horrific or chaotic moment, you wouldn't have had the opportunity to see that.
No, that's a really good point, and the fact that I was aware of that is something that my soul was speaking to, obviously, because you'd say I was a great father. You'd have to talk to my kids about that.
Yeah,
They can.
we all see that. But at the end of the day, if your kids are talking to you and they run from the hospital to run up there and your son picks you up, obviously there's a great relationship there.
But it wasn't just that. So, some weeks later, I was supposed to go skiing in your home state, Washington State. My son and we were going to go skiing. I'd already booked the flights and everything, so I got my doctor's permission to fly earlier than I was supposed to, and so here I am in a wheelchair at DFW, airport along the way, the stopover to Seattle. And my wheelchair attendant, instead of putting me on this the electric car that takes you from terminal to terminal, she decided, I think she wanted the tip at the end. She ended up taking me up onto the monorail, and it was President's Day weekend. So a lot of people who weren't travelers were going to be there, very crowded. So here I am in a wheelchair with my legs sticking straight out with a cast. You don't get more vulnerable than that. And I knew that when this car, this monorail car, would start up, packed with people, that people would just fall over. That's what they do. So it just so happens that this elderly woman was standing right in front of the car, carrying an inappropriate bag for the occasion, like long handles, and it was overpacked. It looked like it weighed 50 pounds. And here I am, it was aiming at my leg. So I'm ready for her when the thing was going to start. She was going to swing back at me. So I had one hand up ready for the bag to steer it away from my leg so she wouldn't re-break it, while at the same time trying to steer her away from falling into me in my wheelchair. When the thing started up, she lurched, the bag swung. I grabbed the bag and unconsciously pulled it pretty hard. And I didn't realize that I wasn't just holding my hand against this woman, I was forming a fist. So, in other words, I pulled an old lady down to the floor of this car while punching her in the ribs. Get this, she apologized to me. That's how nice people were. Like the whole world was like remade itself around me. That is the ultimate kairotic moment.
Yeah, so if you're ever feeling sorry for yourself, that's a perfect put a cast on and grab a go up to Seattle. You'll
Exactly.
this is so interesting, Jay. I want to get into something because I think this is really important. We have a lot of leaders that listen to our podcast. And you talked about running up a mountain. It's 3.8 miles, it's 2,800 feet when you're 50s. But you also mentioned, and I think this is everybody knows this story. I'm 52, so everybody has an idea of President Kennedy's speech, the lunar mission, and what that looked like with moral energy and then organizing around that. But these impossible goals, how did that, along with the story you just shared, but how did that make you a more soulful person, especially climbing up that mountain?
Being the word nerd I am, when I was, by the way, I'm a true professional writer, which means that I procrastinate a lot when I write. That's every good professional knows just how to procrastinate. And so my way of doing that was to look up words in the Oxford English Dictionary. It's a delightful habit. And I was doing that at one point while procrastinating from doing my actual writing. And it occurred, I was wondering whether hyperbole, this exaggeration, was a trope. Now, tropes are really critical to rhetoric. They remake reality for you. If I say the moon is a balloon, you're not going to believe that the moon is a balloon all of a sudden, but you are going to think about the moon slightly differently. You're going to think of it as floating instead of just,
Right.
a satellite up there. And so I wondered whether hyperbole, this exaggeration, would maybe do the same thing, make you think a little bit differently. So I was looking it up, just looking up the etymology in the Oxford English Dictionary. And so I saw that hyperbole comes from two Greek words, hyper, which means above or beyond, and bole. What does bole mean? Turns out bole is where we get the word ball. It means to throw. So this is awesome. It means to throw beyond. And I immediately had this picture in my head, and this is what tropes will do to your brain, of myself, like throwing something beyond myself and then running after it like a dog. That's when it almost immediately occurred to me that at the time I was suffering from this snapping hip syndrome, and I was about to go through this really painful therapy. And I thought, I'm not just going to do the physical therapy and learn to try to walk without a limp as best as possible. I was going to, in order to get myself to do everything that it took, to get back to what I wanted to be, I'd have to go beyond what I thought was the impossible and then fail to the point where I'm better than I ever was. If I somehow So I decided I was going to do what Olympians do on this particular mountain in New Hampshire. They train for this because it's a perfect, you mentioned 2.8 miles, 3.8 miles.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, 2,800 feet of elevation
Don't
gain.
cut yourself short, Jay.
I
This is
know.
crazy.
That's not hyperbolic.
Mm.
So only a dozen people had ever run their age up this mountain, which reached the top of this mountain in fewer minutes than your olden years. I decided that I was 57, just turned 57. I thought I was going to spend a year and on my birthday training and going through this therapy. And on my 58th birthday, I was going to make this attempt to run my age up Mount Moosilauke in New Hampshire in less than 58 minutes. And I decided that every minute less than 58 that I ran up would be my true age. That would be my soul's true age. If I could run it in 56 minutes, I'd be 56. And even though I was turning 58, that while my birthday, well, gave me an extra minute to run my age because I'd be a year older, you gain an extra minute. The thought of it sounded like stupid and pointless, which also made it perfect because I thought, okay, what I'm really doing here is I'm going to use this goal to test the art of persuasion on myself. I have to get myself to believe it was possible, even though I knew. Two physiologists, by the way, I interviewed later, said they thought it would be impossible. Like for somebody over 50 to try to do this, your VO2 max, your body's oxygenation doesn't work as well after 50. And at the same time, your ability to remove lactic acid and stuff like that. Technically, your body doesn't deal with this combination of like red line beyond aerobics and power, the ability to force your muscles to do these. You're leaping from rock to rock as you're going up a nearly vertical mountain at times. Anyway, I thought if I could talk myself into believing in this and talk myself into better habits, and by the way, I had to lose 28 pounds in order just to be light enough to do this run. And I had to get beyond, I was walking with a really tough limp, and I had to get beyond that. And that's a doctor's experimental therapy really helped with that. And just real quick about that therapy, it involved more than 500 shots of dextrose, sugar water. And the point was, what was happening is my gluteal muscles were firing because they were tightening up because of the pain I was in. So it's just cycle. The more pain I felt, the tighter the muscles were. They pulled my iliotibial band, this tendon up your side, to the point where it was catching on my hip bone on each side and causing more pain, which would pull the tendons tighter and so on. So this guy's theory, he'd only done it once before, was to inject so many painful shots, they were like wasp stings, that it would flood the zone of my nervous system to the point where my nerves would stop firing on my hips. And it actually worked. Although, meanwhile, I was willing to tell the doctor anything. I was going to share all my secrets with this guy to get him to stop. If I were a terrorist, that would have been it. I would have given it all up to this guy. But it did work. But then I had to go through very painful exercises, not just physical therapy, but beyond that, training in order to 4 to 6 hours a day in order to be ready to run my age a year from then. Now, even while I was undergoing these shots, I was thinking, this is training. One of the things that the ancient Greeks taught us was that suffering is not simply being undergoing pain. Suffering was a skill to withstand pain, how much you can suffer. So I was thinking, this isn't just pain, this is suffering. And I'm proving how well I can do this. And this is preparing me for the mountain. More than that, this is training. Like I'm lying here on an absolutely sweat-soaked platform while this guy's injecting me with these shots. But what I'm really doing is this is the beginning of my training. And that began my process of being able to reframe what I was going through.
Think this is just flowing perfectly. You talked about the daily self, the person that we really get aggravated with, and then this noble soul. When we're feeling self-doubt, when we're feeling like we may have to fake it to make it, You talk about ethos, and there's 3 qualities of ethos, and I really love this in the book, The Caring, the Craft, and the Cause. Can you tell us how we can reduce the gap so we can start trusting ourselves? And then in that internal audience, the soul, we can begin to build like you did for that mountain?
Thanks for asking. This is, I think you get to the heart of rhetoric here, to the most tools of rhetoric, because they have to do with your projected character, which in Greek is ethos, your ethos.
Mhm.
Now, your ethos is not necessarily who you really are, but what you want your audience to believe you are. Okay. You could be a total crook, but if people are following you as if you're a saint, rhetoric of all.
The guru,
Now,
right, yeah, yeah.
exactly. Now, so there are 3 characteristics that Aristotle describes for the perfect ethos, this character. And that's where you mentioned caring, craft, and cause. So the first characteristic, which in Greek is eunoia, it's often translated badly as disinterested goodwill, means you have the audience's own interest at heart. You have a dog in this hunt. This is all for them. Everything you're doing is just for them. If you're talking to yourself, what does that mean exactly? What it means is doing your very best for that noble part of yourself. You owe it to yourself. Now, yourself being your soul. Now, there's a characteristic that the Greeks really believed in called philos, which is the obligation that a friend has to a friend or
Mm.
a husband to a wife or whatever. And so getting people
The
to
loyalty,
believe
right.
the loyalty that you're them, you will do it for them. Exactly. Now, this is really key to the art of leadership, but also is the key to allowing your soul to lead yourself while you're trying to lead your soul. You're creating this relationship with your soul. So that's what I call caring, this belief of your audience, which in this case is your soul, that you're doing the best for them. You're expressing this philos. Then there's craft. Now, craft has to do with your audience's belief that you can solve the problem at hand, that you really know what you're doing. So, for example, you wouldn't, if you want to get your appendix out, you're not going to hire Mother Teresa, who's a wonderful person, not trained in surgery, and you're not going to hire some guy just out of med school for that matter. You want to know that this person, this surgeon, has performed this surgery a number of times. That is what Aristotle called phronesis or practical wisdom, which is a combination of like book learning, but also experience, but also this belief that you can solve a particular problem, like appendicitis things. So that's what I call craft. So we got caring, which is disinterest, craft, which is make your audience believe that you can solve a problem and you know what you're doing. Most important, Aristotle said, was what he called arete or virtue. I call it cause, which is what's the higher thing you're aiming at? What's the most important? Why are we really doing this? What's your cause? Now, how did I do this and to convince myself to run up a mountain? It's a whole lot easier if you're in the C-suite of a Fortune 500 company and you're thinking about those 3 things, or for that matter, if you're thinking of changing careers or applying for a new job, you can do what I call a 3C analysis of your resume, where, okay, am I showing my craft enough and caring and cause? Is there a good balance among these things? Particularly craft is going to be pretty important. How can I portray myself in a way that plays to my strengths while making my weaknesses look like strengths for that matter? How do I do that to myself when I want to run up a mountain? Okay. So caring had to do with what I most really needed, not what I wanted from moment to moment, but what my true need was. Why was it that it was so important for me to run up a mountain? And I realized that all my life, I wanted to be an athlete, had been. And I thought, I have the soul of an athlete. The fact that I never showed any evidence of being an athlete that's just me separating from my soul. I really thought of myself as an enthusiastic outdoorsman in every way a great athlete. And I wanted to prove that I was the kind of
It
outdoorsman
is
who
being
could
an
accomplish
athlete,
something.
though. If you go with an outdoorsman somewhere and they're hiking and hiking, I've had that before where it's been like, how do you do this? How do you, so that, I think outdoorsmen are athletes.
I wish you told me that I wouldn't have had to go through the trouble of running up that damn mountain. I was an athlete all along.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, thank you. The other thing was craft. And for me, how was I going to demonstrate to myself that I knew what to do? Train? Well, I have the soul of a nerd and a journalist. So I interviewed people. I read science journals. I talked to sports experts of all kinds of what was the best, most efficient way to train. I had a nutritionist on speed dial so I could figure out how to lose weight without losing too much muscle, all that good stuff. So that was my phronesis. That's my practical wisdom or craft. Like I knew as a journalist and someone who knew how to do research, I had the perfect craft. I'm an expert at talking to experts and learning from them. Okay. Then finally, but what was the cause? This is the most stupid, selfish, pointless act where I actually was going to lose income so that my family would suffer, so I could do this self-indulgent thing to prove I was an athlete. My cause was I was going to prove that these tools of rhetoric could apply to myself, or at least I could learn which ones did and which ones might not work. And I would share that. I'd write a book about it someday so that my higher cause, which by the way is a true cause, is to get people interested in the art of rhetoric, which created the Enlightenment, created Western civilization and much of Eastern civilizations as we know them, and could save us all in the long run, to allow us to disagree without anger. That was my cause. By getting you to think, okay, how are you going to change your own life? Maybe I could get you interested in this art that would allow you to lead people to a better place. That was my cause.
Yeah, and it led to, I think, in the book you talk about decorum, and you mentioned, which is so awesome, you mentioned Benjamin Franklin's chastity experiment, which when we think about Benjamin Franklin, and we think about chastity, and I know that word can mean different things, but immediately I went to whorehouses in France and him, and then failing over and over again. But at the same time, when you look at his life, and I looked that up, that chastity experiment, and begin to go over it, it was like, oh, this is why he was so successful. So it creates this, I don't know what you would know the right word, but when you're faking it till you make it, like you even talked about with your leg, how you had changed it into a swagger, even though your hip was hurting. What is that thought process and how can we do that? Because there's like the woo woo is the manifestation or pretend like you're already rich, all those things. What do you look at when you see decorum?
Decorum is not just good manners. It comes from it's a Latin word that means fitness, meaning fitting into yourself. Now, when you're talking about decorum with yourself, it's how you're fitting with the soul. Ultimately, is your behavior that avoids cognitive dissonance, this separation from your truest self. Now, at the same time, you talk about this can sound pretty woo, and of course it does. Like manifestation, I'm a skeptic about everything as a journalist. I don't believe in manifestation actually causing things to happen. What manifestation can do, if you're visualizing your own future, it's a way of persuading yourself that you're capable of this, that you can make things happen. It also opens you up to changes that turn into opportunities. So you think things are happening in all the right ways for you, but when really you're just reinterpreting. Okay, so there actually is a logical principle behind this, and that is Aristotle's logical deduction, believe it or not. So he came up with this tool in rhetoric called the enthymeme, where you start with a belief of someone or an audience's belief, and you talk about how it leads to something else. If I say, and I wrote about this in the book, if I say, it looks like rain, we should bring an umbrella. That's logical deduction. No,
Right.
It looks like rain. This is a belief. There are clouds in the sky, report, etc. We believe it's going to rain. So logically, the sensible thing to do now would be to bring an umbrella. Okay. So now, if I say, I'm not a good singer, I'm actually shy in front of strangers, you will never, ever see me at karaoke night in a bar. I don't even stay up that late. If I said to myself, I have proven that I can meet the most difficult, awkward challenge and embarrass myself in front of strangers by running almost naked up a mountain, I could do karaoke night. Now, is that true? It's this great logical deduction. This is true, therefore that is true. This is true, therefore I can do this. Now, I hear people say all the time, I'm an expert at napping, by the way. It's probably my greatest achievement. I am such a good napper. But when I say to people, like, napping is great, like, it's the most underrated art, and people will say to me, "I don't nap." That's literally true.
Right,
Absolutely.
right.
The thing is, there now, when you're talking about decorum with your soul, the question is your soul really a sleep-deprived napper? It's not. Your soul probably wants to nap. The question is, how do you convince yourself you can? Well, you can do it with an enthymeme. You can say, I know how to relax during
Mhm.
cocktail hour. I know how to relax listening to trance music or whatever it is.
Right.
Therefore, I could nap. So by saying I'm not a napper, you're convincing yourself. Now, you can manifest that nap all you want. It's the same thing. You're convincing yourself. So is this you're talking about Aristotelian deductive logic, man? This is philosophy.
Yeah, which is it's so funny how we've in maybe modern spirituality or the new age movement or whatever, we've turned a lot of this and just switched it over to, I think, more of a surface level consumeristic thought process that people want to have a hope, like this false sense of hope or something, which leads me into the word charms. Not that this is perfect. These mystical amulets, these but you talk about them as more of like sweet words or rhythmic expressions. I know you mentioned Plato saw it as like a healing strategy. So what is like the Nike Just Do It, the soldier slogan, stir the blood? You talk about all these things. Why are charms so powerful?
What's really interesting is that the Greeks understood something that seems to have now there's not a lot of data on this in neurology, so I don't want to go too far. But there is a good deal of evidence that this part of your brain called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex is the part of your brain that interprets reality. What makes you think things are is real or not real. Now, you know that when you're if I used to commute to work by bike in a number of cities. And in the cities that had a lot of bicyclists, cars noticed, and it was much safer. Like where there are a lot of bikes. When I was biking in areas, and I started biking to work in Philadelphia as a teenager back in the early 70s, and cars, I was invisible. That cars literally didn't see me. Now, that's because they hadn't had this repetition of the sight of a bicycle that prepared their ventromedial prefrontal cortex to actually see the bike. They didn't have the synapses of a
Mhm.
bike. So I was literally invisible. They weren't just ignoring me, they literally didn't see me. And as a result, I got 2 bikes totaled from
Yes,
people who
yes.
couldn't see me. Okay, so now go back a few thousand years, and warriors, as they went into battle, would beg, pray to the god of healing, a god called Paean, Paen, Paean, to save them, to keep them alive during battle. Well, it appears that what they were chanting was a particular rhythm. It was a combination of short and long syllables. And I'll get to that in just a bit. Because that same pattern of syllables created the snack food industry, literally in Madison Avenue. All right, meanwhile, soldiers running into battle, praying to this god to save their lives, were chanting this rhythm over and over again, and it convinced them that they were being protected because they were doing this. Now, this rhythm, repeated enough, seems to, um, fire synapses more than any other kind of expression. So rhyming can do that a little bit, but apparently this rhythm does. And so there's one of my favorite chants at basketball games in the Ivy League, where of course you get the nerdiest of all crowds, is they will yell, "Pell them, make them relinquish the ball." That is the perfect paean. That is apparently identical to what the ancient Greek and even Roman soldiers would chant going into battle, and that became known as a slogan. A slogan was a prayer to the god of healing in this rhythm. Okay, so 3,000 years later, you get a snack food that you can't eat just one,
Mhm.
peon. Now, the quicker picker upper. That is this combination of long and short syllables and sometimes just short syllables, but in a kind of pattern that works in a way that enacts your brain. You can't get it earworms into your brain without the music. And that's one of the most effective things at all. So I ended up coming up with my own PNs, really stupid ones, thinking that if I could get myself to repeat them often enough that they seem natural to me, I wonder if that would affect me. And they did. It was one of the most effective things I did. So I would chant as I was running painfully up this mountain while training. My legs love rocks. I flow up rocks. And I kept saying that over and over again, where I kept thinking, my legs do flow up rocks. And of course they weren't. It's like terrible. And the idea that I was flowing, that just came from this repetition, this rhythmic repetition that is this repetition of a PN. And if you look at so many advertising slogans throughout Madison Avenue history, you'll find PNs all over the place. It's super fun to look up slogans on the internet and see if you can find these rhythmic patterns. Say them aloud, especially if you're in a library where you can annoy people, and you're going to learn a lot.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. I want to get into where we're coming up on the hour. So I want to take some time and get into the soul bending aspect of it. And I know you wrote that Aristotle believed that our purpose, and this is so important, our purpose isn't something external we search for, that it's already within our own soul. Can you, but before we'll get more into happiness and AI and all that different things, but I want to stop there. Let's talk about purpose.
I tell the story in the book of this classic story that you hear in motivational speeches all the time. I like to say it's the free bird of motivational speeches. It's about the three bricklayers. This guy is walking down the street in search of hiring a bricklayer. Across these three bricklayers, laying bricks, and he goes up to the first guy and asks the obvious stupid question, "What are you doing?" And the first guy says, "I'm laying bricks."
Hmm.
He goes to the second guy and says, "What are you doing?" And the second guy says, "I'm earning a living for my family." And so the guy goes up to the third bricklayer and says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm building a cathedral." Now, the lesson to that was that the third guy has the purpose, right? The guy who's inspired to work. Now, he's going to be the one to hire. And I argue that, like, from an Aristotelian basis, that employer should hire the first guy, the guy who simply said he's laying bricks, because he probably has more of the soul of a bricklayer. Think about this. The second guy, the moment he can get a better salary, he's going to leave you and earn more money. Bricklayer, he's a worker for money. I probably should, like, join the ministry, become a priest. It's not a
Yes,
bricklayer.
exactly.
And so your truest soul is what you truly are. And one way to determine that, I like to say, is think of vacation, which is always fun to do. Where do you want to go for vacation? So you think, okay, what's on your bucket list? First of all, you should ask yourself, why do you even have a bucket list? What's that for? Is this for your ego, or is this to satisfy some purpose? And then I talk about in the book how if you go to the Louvre and you go to see the Mona Lisa, you're in a crowded room where people literally are jumping up and down with their cell phones.
And it's like this big.
Exactly. It's a really small picture. It's a real,
Yeah.
but people are going to check that off their bucket list. Now, what has that got to do with their relationship with their soul? What's that got to do with their true purpose? You can find that out thinking, okay, what would be the most soul satisfying thing I can do on vacation? What you're doing is what Aristotle told you to do, which is to separate for your true your wants from your true needs. And your wants are just like, I want a selfie on Instagram. I want more followers. That's just a want. It's like your donut for social.
Yes.
But what you really need is like a healthy body. So you skip the donut, or a healthy soul that you're in touch with. So you're not going to go to the Mona Lisa. Now, personally, what I did, I happened to get in my touch with my soul really quickly because I'm an introvert. So I went to the nearest empty room, which contained Charlemagne's sword, in an empty room. And I get to put my nose within 4 inches against the glass, which was awesome. Oh, by the way, it's a cool sword. And Charlemagne's sword, the man who invaded England and gave us all these horrible French words we speak to this day.
I know. And in the book, he argued that you talk about this in Aristotle, that the greatest happiness comes from being the most human. And you say, what is that? And then you talked about, and I was even thinking, what's the greatest human? The first thing was like, we invent technology. We're good with fire, computers, AI now. But you said it's not the tools, it's not the building, the cathedrals. And then I thought art makes us super creative. Animals do the same thing over and over again. We create art. And then you talked about cooperation and adaptability. That's where little adaptable machines. But in what you said is it's words. Words allow us to seek meaning and convey abstractions and manipulate ideas. And you were saying that words bend our souls. How is it that without words, we aren't really human?
If you could, everything you mentioned is the great achievements of humankind. There are species of animals that do it better. Now, if you look at how a spider builds a web, it's going to be different every time. Now, it's the spider appreciating its own art. I don't know, maybe. On the other hand, there are species of shrimp, bioluminescent shrimp, that express colors like many times more than we can even perceive. Okay, they can express beauty if you want to call it that way. Architecture, I'll tell you, there are termite mounds in Africa that are self-air conditioning and have been for millions of years. Okay, like where are we ahead of animals? There's only one way, and that is we can use words as ways that influence the brains of others. And we can use words that last several thousand years. I have been listening to Aristotle for years now. Aristotle's been dead for a long time. No animal has been able to achieve that. Now, can AI do that better? The question is, when we're trying to get in touch with our own souls or the souls of others, what we're really looking for is the deepest meanings of. We're not looking for what's the likeliest next word, which is what large language models do. They're predictive models, right? So if you're looking for inspiration, and I have a chapter on inspiration, I think
Yes,
this
you
is
do.
really important in terms of soulfulness. And there are things that we can do that will invent new things that I'm convinced AI will never be able to do. And one of it has to do with what Michel de Montaigne, this wonderful writer who invented the essay, called liberality. And liberality is this openness. Now, just real quick, I refer to the Bible's Acts 2, which is the one where the Pentecost, where
Right.
a bunch of Jesus' disciples are sitting around, apparently at 9 o'clock in the morning. It says so in the scripture, drinking wine, as one does. And all of a sudden, this forked fire comes down from the heavens. And all of a sudden, some of the disciples are speaking languages they never understood before. Now, there's a meaning to that, which is that this God is universal, applies to everybody around the world. But more than that, I like to think it didn't say all the disciples started speaking in tongues. Oh, some of them did. Okay, but what about the others? The others were thinking, okay, I don't like this. I'm not letting this in. And some of them probably were thinking, wow, this is interesting. Suddenly I'm speaking Persian. Now, they were open to it. And I think that is something that a large language model, which sucks everything up, isn't going to be hearing the voice of God. That there's going to be something very different. Starts with your understanding of the meaning of the words you're using for yourself and the ways you're defining your life, which is what framing is about. Can AI do that? Maybe someday. But I think even the singularity will never achieve that. We'll still have that one thing that animals and computers can't have.
Yeah, and you explained it so well is like with AI, it lacks this human emotional pill, but it excels at compounding ideas. Which you talked in inspiration, you talk about that. And it can come up with variations and prototypes, and it can do that at like mass amounts of speed, and it's getting quicker and quicker. But it can't, and this was really good to point this out when everybody's looking. Eventually, AI, I believe people will worship it at some point, but it can't feel shame or wield irony, not with human intent, as you say in the book. So it's a great assistant, and you used it. You talked about this in your Substack for ChatGPT, but the human element of persuasion and actually having those deep conversations or those soul bending or that emotional awakenings that a lot of people have had and that we've seen down through the centuries, even flawed as humans as we are, that have led to all different religions or whatever it may be. Those are all like just crazy adventures that humans are on, and AI it can't do any of that.
Who knows?
Yeah,
Maybe
maybe.
someday. The thing is that all this comes down to one thing. and that's trust. That's really what rhetoric is all about, whether you can get people to trust you. If you look at the great hucksters of all time, I wrote recently in my Substack newsletter about Sam Bankman-Fried, the guy is now in prison. And I said he had the perfect ethos because saints don't need to work very hard to get people to trust or believe in them.
Right, that's
Crooks,
good.
crooks have to be really good at rhetoric.
Right.
And so I think when it comes down to trust, your ability to understand where trust truly comes from, to be able to understand what something soulful is, I think you're getting at something, Jason, when you talk about that's where computers can't go because and this is something that Aristotle wrote about. He was a little bit uncertain about whether ethos, this expression of character, is a kind of emotion because it affects the same parts of the brain, probably. Now, how do we interpret that in ourselves? And how do we interpret that in others? If we're going deeply enough, we're feeling our way through this, which a computer can never do. Now, a computer will be brilliant at faking this. There will be Sam Bankman-Frieds in the future. You know this, that will be
Yes.
cheating the pants off people. The question is, when we prepare for that reality, I think the first thing we have to do is to understand what a soul is in an Aristotelian sense and get in touch with it. That makes us better, at least in my experience. It's made us better at getting in touch with others.
Yeah, that's so good. And I want to close in this one, Jay, for aspiring soul benders. What's one tool from the book that we could just easily start with, that somebody could just start with today?
I'll tell you what I did, and you may hate this, but it's worth trying. I created my own time zone. We're back as now.
I love
So, and of course, my name is Jay. So I came up, my time zone is called J-Light Savings. Now, the way I did this,
Right.
and my problem was a lot of people have a problem even finding time, carving out an hour or two during the day to do what they really want, to get in touch with their souls or carry out their purpose. And I had that same problem. So what I did was I waited until the fall when daylight saving turns into standard time. You gain an hour. Yeah, like it sucks because it gets darker in the evening. But instead, so what I did was I simply set my alarm ahead of an hour, and so that I got up earlier according to the clock, but it felt the same because I was gaining an hour. I simply used that by giving myself another hour. A year later, I did the same thing. Now I have 2 hours. I call it daylight saving. The only problem with that is no one else is on it except for my wife. Makes me pretty boring at night. But as a result, I write and work out. I have accomplished more in the first 2 hours of the day without interruption or could otherwise. And it allowed me, for one thing, to write this book.
That's so good. And I want to thank you, Jay, for writing the Aristotle Guide to Self-Persuasion. You can see it here. It just hit shelves, I think in July, right? July 15th. And you're going to want to dive into these pages, guys. Find it wherever books are sold. And don't forget to check out your popular newsletter. It's on Substack. What's it called on Substack?
Aristotle's Guide to Soul Bending, but just look up my name. That's easy.
Oh, that's perfect. And we'll have the link in the show notes also. But I want to thank you. This has been fun. This, I think, can help reshape a lot of our inner worlds. And it allows us to take the chaos and transform our failures and look at them in a true human format, turn them into triumphs as you gave over and over again in the book. And then for me, it's like, how do I master the art of convincing my own mind? And I think that's why everyone needs to read this book. It's going to be a super big help to everyone. So thank you, Jay, for writing it.
Jason, I've done a bunch of things. This ranks right up to the best. I see why you have so many followers. So keep doing it. I'll be listening.
Thank you.